Well, Dan Andrews has sent shockwaves across the country announcing Victoria will no longer be hosting the 2026 Commonwealth Games. Premier saying that the state would not be able to afford the potentially $7 billion price tag.
To discuss, we're joined by Geelong Mayor Trent Sullivan and 10-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist Leisel Jones in Brisbane. Thank you both so much for your time. Trent, let's start with you. Now, the Victorian government initially predicted the Games would cost $2 billion. It seems whoever crunched those numbers was way off.
Oh, well, way off the mark. This has been an incredible news by cost escalations from over $2 billion to nearly $7 billion. This was news to everybody. We're seeing shocked reactions in the region of Victoria, all the hubs, the organising committee. We just cannot believe these numbers that have finally come out.
Neither can the cops. What's going on down there? Anything we should know about?
Geelong's a busy town.
Hey, just in relation to this decision, I mean, one of the great beneficiaries in the lead up to the last election was going to be the flow-on effects for regional areas. Yeah. Geelong, what impact will the decision have on Geelong itself?
So one of the major things that's most exciting about the Games isn't just the sport on the field, it's the legacy outcomes to the community post the event itself. The investment in sporting infrastructure, in social services, in upgrades, everything that comes along with it. We definitely welcome the state government's announcement that they'll still be investing over $2 billion into the regions. However, we're yet to have confirmation as to what that will exactly look like. Our greatest concern in the regions is that this money is spent on the ground and our community does get this infrastructure by 2026, but we're waiting on the details.
A lot of people are waiting on a lot of details, it would seem, Mayor, and this is the issue, I guess. Of course, those regional communities still need that funding. Are you frustrated, though, that the government took so long to pull the plug on the Games and perhaps should never have entered them in the first place, instead promising to spend that money on infrastructure from the word go?
We all knew that when it was announced that a regional model of delivering the Games had never been done before and that there were going to be additional costs in this. That's why we were so excited when it came out that it would be for an affordable amount for $2.6 billion that the government did commit to. To now be so close out from the Games, it's only a short while, it's only less than 3 years, to have it reneged on that is incredibly heartbreaking. So our concern really is for infrastructure and for the community clubs, the people on the ground, the kids who need this access to infrastructure to help them play their sports. That is what the greatest concern is, and that's one of the most heartbreaking details about this.
Level with us, you don't think you'll get any of that cash?
Well, look, the way I'm seeing it is that there's money, they've committed spending to the regions. We have to have details on whether that will be directed exactly towards what the Commonwealth Games commitments were. There's money back on the table. Everybody wants a slice of the pie. Everybody wants infrastructure for their communities. And we feel like we're going to have a fight ahead of us to make sure that ours is delivered.
Leisel, I don't think there's a person in Australia who doesn't feel sorry for the athletes here. How much of an impact will it have on them?
It will have a huge impact, but it only won't have an impact on the athletes, but it's actually going to have an impact on small businesses in the area that were planning to have a Commonwealth Games in their area, which means that people from all around the world were going to be visiting their businesses, frequenting them, spending money, and that's probably the most disappointing part. And for someone like me, don't get me wrong, the athletes are so resilient. Wherever the Commonwealth Games will be held, they will turn up, they'll do a wonderful job, and they won't be fazed by something like this. But it's all the people on the peripheries that do get affected most by cancellation of a Commonwealth Games. So my heart really goes out to them. It also goes out to sports like netball, squash, lawn bowls, who don't get the opportunity to compete at an Olympic Games, and the Commonwealth Games is their opportunity to compete on the world stage, to get their sport out there. And I'm really disappointed for kids all around regional Victoria that now won't get the opportunity to see the stars in their hometown, to be inspired by the wonderful athletes, whether it's the Paralympians that get to compete as well. I think it's really disappointing to see that the little kids will be disappointed that they don't get the chance to see some really great athletes in their local area.
Leisel, I guess this decision has really thrown a lot of uncertainty around the 2026 Games full stop and whether or not they'll go ahead. Are you worried about that outcome?
I'm really worried, actually, because we're not many years out now from the Games happening, and the ability for someone to be able to pick it up. We had Anastasia Palisade yesterday saying that it's going to be very challenging to turn it around. The Gold Coast has the opportunity. We've got all of the facilities, and they did a wonderful job in putting on a Commonwealth Games. It was worldwide. It was just very well received, but it's really challenging to turn it around. So I am really worried about the Commonwealth Games in 2026 and what that's going to look like, because it is a really quick turnaround, and I do worry about that.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I have such great memories of the Com Games in '82. You wouldn't have been alive then, either of you two. But Matilda coming out, the big paper mache kangaroo, and all the kids filing out of it. Tracy with Rob De Castella winning the marathon. I could go on and on. I think
we love the Commonwealth Games. They're amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a real shame. Anyway, well, the last-minute decision to cancel the Commonwealth Games has dashed the hopes of hundreds of Aussie athletes who'd been working and looking forward to representing their country on home soil.
For more, Olympian Grant Hackett joins us now from Melbourne. Grant, thanks so much for your time. What was your initial reaction to the news?
Morning. Yeah, morning, Carl. Morning, Sarah. Disbelief and shock, actually. I thought it was a joke when I first heard the news that they're actually cancelling the Commonwealth Games. I mean, this is not the local bowls club cancelling a weekend meet. I mean, this is something of such a significant nature and so hard to get these sorts of events in your own country, and particularly small countries like Australia. When we host things like the Olympics or Commonwealth Games, it's a big deal. So to cancel it, you know, what feels like, I know it's 2026 last minute, was a real shock.
You're a very successful businessman now. When you look at the economics of it, it doesn't stack up, unfortunately, in the current climate. But I guess you take it back and you say, well, why'd you decide that in the first place? And then you look at the figures for how much it was going to cost in the end. You don't know if they're true or not. So there's still a bit of uncertainty around it. But it is deflating.
Oh, absolutely. It's deflating for not just the athletes, but the entire country, and particularly the state of Victoria and Melbourne. But yeah, talking about the figures, Carl, $6 to $7 billion when it originally was going to cost $2.6 billion. I mean, we're talking almost 3 times the original cost. I mean, who did the financial modelling around this to begin with? Because you know, we're talking about break costs, that it's going to be $1 billion to break this event. But what about all the costs that went into the bid for the event in the first place? That's tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent on that process as well. So, you know, we normally get a lot of economic benefit when we host these big events like the Grand Prix, like the Australian Open here in Melbourne. And obviously the Commonwealth Games is similar to those types of events. So what's the economic benefit we're also giving up by not hosting this event in 2026 also?
And Grant, we know, of course, Victoria is in ballooning debt at the moment, the worst in the country, so something had to give here. But what we don't know, around that uncertainty continues, is how much this will actually cost us just in terms of cancellation.
Yeah, and we all fully appreciate the significant debt that Victoria does have as a state, and certainly tough decisions do need to be made. We've seen taxes go up here in the state, of course, particularly on the back of COVID and the cost of that and the series of lockdowns that we had. But at the same time, why did we just go and cancel the event? Surely we could have revised the event, we could have scaled things down, we could have looked at bringing venues back into Melbourne, where we've got such great sporting infrastructure. I mean, to the left of me, we've got Marvel Stadium, to the right of me, we've got the MCG, we've got the Melbourne Sports and Aquatic Centre around the corner here. We've got such great infrastructure in Melbourne. Why are we looking at, you know, scaling down the event, but still hosting it, but doing it at a much less cost, rather than just saying, hey, the cost was too big, we're going to pull out now and we're going to deflate, you know, the entire state, nation and all the athletes that were really looking forward to competing in front of that home crowd.
For a minute, if Dan Andrews thought it would cost him the election in a couple of years' time, he wouldn't have done it. Clearly, he's read the mood of the public, right? I mean, the guy's a smart operator.
Oh, there's a reason he's been in power for so long, and he's obviously ridden a lot of ups and downs, and particularly through COVID, and his popularity has certainly stayed intact down here in Victoria. So reading the tea leaves as a politician, I mean, they're very good tactically and strategically at making sure that they align to the public's interest. But at the same time, I honestly think these sporting events, we can't underestimate the power of them. We saw, you know, when we held the Olympics in 2000, the inspiration that brought to the nation. We saw here in 2006 in Melbourne just how good the Commonwealth Games were, and I think we're really going to miss out on 2026, unfortunately.
I agree, and part of that movement towards 2032, big international meets, a great thing psychologically for our young ones to get accustomed to.
Well, that's one of the biggest disappointments in all of this. Of course, the biggest sporting event in the world is the Olympic Games, and the lead-up meets are just as important because it gives you that opportunity to race all the international athletes. It also gives you an opportunity to race in front of a home crowd. For me as an athlete, I got to compete at 3 Olympic Games, but racing in front of everyone in Sydney and the extra pressure that comes with that, don't get me wrong, it is unbelievable to have that home support, but it's a different sort of pressure. So when you have an opportunity in all these lead-up international international competitions to compete in front of a home crowd, and you build up to 2032 where you really get on the world stage, the world's biggest sporting event. To miss out on that now is going to be costly to some extent to some of the athletes that will be competing in 2032 that don't now have that opportunity, and with all the uncertainty now around the Commonwealth Games itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Geez, you look good. Have you been drinking the water from the Yarra? Look amazing.
Doing the best I can, Carl. Doing the best I can. I mean, I'm trying to follow in your footsteps, of course. So
Yes.
I've been looking at your diet and I've just been going, Carl's doing something right. Don't you agree, Sarah?
I do
Look
agree,
at the
Carl.
guy
You're
who's
looking
next to you every day.
fantastic.
How lucky are you?
Looking fantastic. Oh, hello. Hello.
Thanks, big fella. Love your work.
Grant.
Welcome back to the show. It's great to have your company. Well, where did it all go so wrong? The Victorian government is in the middle of an absolute cluster this morning. Here's the Premier yesterday.
The cost of hosting these games in 2026 is not the $2.6 billion which was budgeted. It is in fact at least $6 billion. The costs incurred in terms of services, security, transport.
The Commonwealth Games boss thinks otherwise.
The stated cost overruns, in our opinion, are a gross exaggeration and not reflective of the operational costs presented to the Victorian 2026 Organising Committee Board as recently as June this year.
There was no other alternative, says the Premier.
We've looked at Melbourne, we've looked at less sports, we've looked at less hubs. We've looked at every conceivable option.
Except there was an alternative.
The Victorian Government willfully ignored recommendations to move events to purpose-built stadia in Melbourne and in fact remain wedded to proceeding with expensive temporary venues in regional Victoria.
Ah, who to believe. Joining us to discuss is today's headline makers themselves, Independent MP Monique Ryan and Nine's Heidi Murphy in Melbourne. Morning, ladies. Monique, to you first up. A great loss for so many parties. What was your original reaction?
Oh, look, my original reaction, Carl, was I felt really sorry for the athletes and for the teams and the support people involved in this. It'd be a huge disappointment for them, and I think we all feel sorry for them for their loss. But having said that, we are in a massive cost of living crisis, and some Victorians can't afford to have a roof over their head. People are struggling to pay for heating, for groceries and for power, and we have to take those things into consideration as well in making decisions like this.
We knew it was coming, though. He knew the budget was in a fairly ordinary state.
Well, it's a bit surprising, and I do feel sorry for those Commonwealth Games organisers. They're telling us that they were effectively blindsided by this. But yes, the state has $135 billion in debt, with massive infrastructure projects ongoing to which we're already committed, and yet you can't pay for everything. I feel really, really sorry for those athletes affected by this, and I can only imagine their disappointment. But the reality is that we have to concentrate on the really important things for Victorians in what is the worst cost of living crisis in decades.
All right, well handled, Monique. Heidi, the Premier blames blowouts. There is no question there are budget problems, as Monique points out. But what about this? Dan could be the smartest Premier in the country. I mean, where is the loss for him?
Well, that's an interesting question, Carl. I don't know that there is necessarily a loss. There's the reputational loss for the state. There's the potential reputational loss of the next time we go cap in hand to try to bid for a major project to get an event here. There's the pride we lose as the sporting capital of Australia, stuffing up something this severely. But he is able to, as Monique has outlined there, explain, I saved you money. I've shown fiscal restraint. I'm not going to go so far as to show fiscal restraint by pulling back on, say, the suburban rail loop, which is a huge project worth hundreds of billions, but he's shown fiscal restraint here. He's pulled back, he's tightened the belt. I think people will support that, will endorse that. There is also, though, the question of how did we get the math this wrong? Someone has to be responsible for that. He says he's responsible for everything ultimately. Is it on him?
Agree with that. And if you're talking about budget blowouts of that magnitude, how can you be trusted with what you've got now? Monique, I think that's a great point Heidi makes about the international sporting reputation of the great state of Victoria, and how do you bid for anything in the future with any assurity or credibility?
I think that's absolutely true, Carl. And that is probably the biggest mistake that we've made here, is to commit to something that we weren't in a position really to take forward. Hopefully that won't be an issue going forward. Obviously, we won't be looking at any really big events for some time, and during the interim we'll have a chance to rebuild our reputation for this sort of thing. But it does, play into the fact that we have to decide what matters to Australians. And right now, what people need is support with the incredible cost of living pressures that so many people.
So what you're saying this morning is Queensland should get rid of the Olympics?
I think the Olympics are a different matter altogether.
All right.
2032, hopefully these cost of living pressures will be gone by then.
Well, I don't know.
We need the Olympics.
Well, I don't know how they wedge the
those.
cost down. I mean, they think they're at $7 billion now. Lord knows what they're going to end up at. But Heidi, taxpayers will be forced to pick up the bill in Victoria. That's a problem. And if it was a lemon right from the start, why did they dive in?
Well, yeah, and there's the bills that we still don't know. We don't know, one, how much has been outlaid. The Premier said there'll be a full accounting at some point. When that point is, I don't know. It could be into the hundreds of millions of dollars already outlaid on things. No major contract signed, but there's money that's gone out the door. And there is a contract that we have with the Commonwealth Games Federation that we have to tear up, that we have torn up. What is the cost of that? The exit fee, we don't know. There is outlay that we've put on this, just not. We've stopped before we've spent the 2.6 billion or the 7, 8, 9 billion it could have ended up at.
Hey there, Today fans. Sarah and...
What's my name again?
Oh my God, Carl.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel, though. Subscribe now for more news, special reports, and amazing Aussie stories.
And Carl misbehaving,
Whoa,
of course.
that never happens.
Always happens.
What's she talking about?
Always happens.